I am Abby. I'm a volunteer for Green Home NYC's Green Careers team, and we're really excited to host this panel for women in renewable energy. We're a little late for Women's History Month, but it's cool. Thank you, Jess and National Grid, for hosting us, and thank you to our panelists for coming. So if we could, just get an introduction going down the line from each one of you. Just give me your name, which company you work for, your title, and then can you tell me which park in New York City is your favorite to spend a day like today at? So how about we start with you?
Okay, my name is Alex Weinholtz. I'm the Director of Project Development and Operations with PowerFlex. And Park, I got hung up on the park part. Okay, I think Central Park, because I lived on the Upper West Side for a while, but now I'm downtown, and Washington Square Park is lovely, but doesn't have the energy of Central Park, so I'll stick with Central Park.
We're all going to have the same
Yep.
answer, I think, on Park. Hi, I'm Nathalie Joanneau, so I should update my LinkedIn profile. I work for Atlantic Shores Offshore Wind, which is a joint venture between Shell and EDF Renewables in offshore wind. I am a chief of staff to our CEO within the joint venture. And my favorite park, I would say Central Park by heart, but I have friends who like soccer, so I always end up at McCarran, and yeah. You do that for your friends.
That's nice of you. Hi everyone, my name's Anmol. I'm a director of solar at Brightcore Energy. In terms of my favorite park, I think I want to break the mold a little. I'm going to say Prospect Park in Brooklyn. Very nice, very large, lots of trails. I highly suggest you check it out.
Awesome. Well, hopefully the weather has turned for the better. So let's sort of, start things off by talking about beginnings. So, can you guys tell me a little bit about like your academic background first, and then, sort of tell us what your career path has been like? How did you get to like where you all are today, since you guys are clearly very accomplished? Anmol, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So academically, I started off studying engineering, and I have a bit of a more technical background. So I do have a chemical and biomolecular engineering degree from the NYU Tandon School of Engineering. At the time, I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. I just wanted to have a degree in something that was versatile enough to keep my options open. So shortly after I graduated, I decided I wanted to stay in the New York City area. Most of the jobs that people in my graduating class were looking at were at manufacturing plants, other similar chemical engineering positions outside of New York. So I stumbled upon an opportunity to work for a startup that focused on solar in New York City. So solar on skyscrapers, or not necessarily skyscrapers, but buildings over 100 feet, for example. Very densely populated city areas. So I started working with them right out of college until I eventually moved to Enter Solar, who is a national solar developer that worked, on several projects across several regions of the United States. So initially I was focused on New York City, but then I also had the chance to work on projects sort of in a broader region, going as far as Chicago in Illinois. And then most recently after Enter Solar, I transitioned to Brightcore to help them build out their solar team a little bit more. They were focusing a little bit more on educational institutions and projects like community solar, so that really sort of drawn me to them, and I've been working with them for about 3 years.
Impressive.
Thank you.
I don't want to go next.
Okay, Alex, what about you?
So I actually have a degree from business school, so I'm French, you heard it from my name. Business school in France, same as you. I didn't really know at the time what I really wanted to do, but I've always been really green and ecology minded. So I was debating at the time, I remember was maybe 2021, between ENGOs and other areas. the not issue, but the complexity is that I also wanted to have a career, and I wanted to make sure that I got financially secure. And I think when I started researching ENGOs, it wasn't necessarily what was going to get me to have it all. So I had a good actually encounter with a great teacher who sort of told me there's different things. There's water, there's waste, there's renewable energy. So I ended up doing a first internship after my business school, and then I immediately started working for EDF Renewable. So I work for the Atlantic Shores joint venture, but I'm seconded I'm basically a loan from EDFR to the joint venture, and I've been, I don't know, very lucky to be able to be with them for the past 16 years now. But basically 5 years increments. So I did 5 years in France as a solar and onshore wind developer. So boots on the ground, that was, I guess, business school and then boots on the ground school. And then I moved to Canada and worked for the Canadian subsidiary in Montreal for 5 years. And there I really did both onshore wind development and solar development, but at bigger scale. The territory is different than France, obviously. And I started developing expertise in offtakes, so basically securing revenues from the states, answering requests for proposals from the provinces in Canada, the states in the US, to be able to build these projects. And that's what got me into offshore wind. Basically, within EDFR, I developed that expertise, and they needed me for RFPs here in the US, so they got me here, and I've been here since 5 years, becoming a New Yorker, learning what it is. And within the joint venture, I've done many things. That joint venture was like 5 people in 2018, including me, and now we're 200.
Wow.
And so I've done project services like costing, scheduling, risks. I've done joint venture implementation, RFPs, and now I'm in the role that I have. So learning a lot of different things and taking the niches where they were present, basically.
That's awesome. Great. So I went to the University of Richmond in Virginia and studied. I wanted to go to law school. It was my dream, and I studied policy. And it really was my senior year of college. I was taking a course on energy and law out of like the Richmond Law School, and it was an awesome experience with a great professor. And I realized that I was more interested in the energy than the law. And I was also staring down the barrel of law school and a lot of debt. And I was like, I don't think I'm ready for this at 22 years old. And so I figured I would defer a couple of years if I could, try to find a job that touched the energy sector somehow, and wanted to just kind of get my feet under me outside of one class that I had taken for one semester my senior year. And I was actually fortunate enough, I did a lot of like networking and outreach, and did everything I could to just set up calls with people who were adjacent or in the industry, whether it was like a friend of a parent or just somebody I found on LinkedIn. And I was fortunate enough to meet somebody who was a like kind of HR. The company didn't have HR, but it was like a bit of an HR role with an energy brokerage company in Connecticut. So I actually started more on like the trading and commodities side in energy, and I did natural gas and power. I was on like the natural gas and electricity desk, and so it was a lot of like NYMEX forward, and I got to do trade tickets, and I learned a lot about the commodities market, and quickly was like, oh my God, I don't want to be in brown power, and this is like fracking based and not particularly like where my interests and like passions were. But it was such a phenomenal education and like the overall energy markets, and I felt like I learned so much from my peers and was really able to take what I learned and then understand where like renewables sat and how the overall electricity markets and natural gas markets influenced renewables and our ability to increase renewables within the U.S. And I did 2 years on a brokerage desk there, and then was like desperate to get into renewables any way I could. To be honest, took a job that like I knew I was not going to like, but it was a great way to get my foot in the door, and it's a hard industry to break into, as I think like most people know. And had a year of kind of continuing to keep like tendrils out in the marketplace, but wanted to stay within renewables, specifically on the solar side, but at the time was looking more into like utility scale, less on the C&I side, more like virtual power purchase agreements for solar and a bit for wind as well in like upstate. And an old coworker of mine actually from my first company was at PowerFlex, which was Enter Solar at the time, where Annabelle and I worked together. And she reached out and asked if we could have lunch. She said there was a great leadership team, including Lucy, who's here. And I was like, I'm not interested. I'm not leaving. I'm more financial markets, not like on, hands-on like C&I development. I met with a few leaders within Enter Solar at the time and was like totally floored with the company's mindset and kind of ethos and the work that they were doing. So it was I would say by happenstance that I ended up there. But the relationship that I built, 5 years or 4 years previously was the reason that door opened again, and I've been there for the last 6 years. I started as an analyst and then as a project developer, and I've been the manager or director of the team for the last 3 years now.
Great. So we're going to kind of move into, more of advice and how to get into the renewables industry, because I think a lot of people are interested in that. Let's start with Natalie. Do you have any tips or advice for someone looking to either transition into the renewables the renewables space, or that's just starting out, fresh out of university or college, and what advice would you give them? To either of those sort of archetypes of people that are looking to get into the renewables field.
I would definitely stay curious and don't stay limited to what you think is your skill set or what you think, what you've learned from your degree, or because it's very fluid. You can go wherever you're needed as long as you have a sense of initiative and you're passionate. And I think we have a majority of women. It's very often also that as women, we don't believe in ourselves. Typically, I was impressed by, I have 15 or 16 years of experience now. And before we started the panel, you told me what your degree was and what studies you did. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's so technical. Immediately, I was like, she's way more technical than me. She's an engineer. And so we tend to do that the whole career. And it doesn't, honestly, it's not that it doesn't matter. It's a lot of work to get a degree, but it's just with the right curiosity, speaking with the right people, and not limiting yourself. I think you can grow. You can enter an industry, and then you can grow within this industry very, very well. So that's one of the things I would say. I'm sure my friends have more to say.
Yeah, Emma, what do you think about?
Yeah, I really agree with your advice. I think being open is really important, especially because sometimes roles aren't, defined in the way that maybe you would expect. Certain titles might have different job descriptions than maybe you would assume just based on your previous experience or maybe what it looks like in other industries. So I would say to really just focus on building your work ethic, your discipline, your public speaking skills, your comfortability with communicating, all the things that are really going to, make you stand out, especially if you don't feel you have relevant experience in the field. Sometimes someone being personable and just being very articulate can put them a step further maybe than someone else that has relevant experience but maybe wouldn't fit as well or communicate as well within the team. So I would try not to get bogged down by what you think you don't have, and really just focus on cultivating what you do and really bringing those strengths to the front.
Alex, you kind of, sort of got into that a little bit in your introduction because you did so much networking, but do you have any specific advice, maybe for someone who is making a transition, especially coming from even though natural gas is adjacent, right? What would you say to someone who is trying to make a career transition into the renewable space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that I wasn't told that I wish I had the perspective when I was younger was that you don't have to be in the same job for 30 years, and within this industry you're probably not going to spend an entire career within one company or one role. I felt like I put a lot of pressure on wanting to be happier and more settled in my role, and it was really freeing to be able to take not a risk necessarily, but to feel confident that I could take a little bit of a career risk, and if it didn't work out exactly as I wanted it to be, that was okay, because every experience is a way for you to find out what you do like and what you don't like, and then it gives you more knowledge to then pursue whatever your next role is. I think for somebody who's looking to switch careers, it might not be the perfect role or the exact thing that you think it should be, but every experience is something to be learned from, and it doesn't have to define the rest of your resume.
I mean, it doesn't have to define the rest of your life.
Exactly. You're not stuck.
So, what are, like, starting out, like, what are some, or, you know, even now as, you know, established renewable energy professionals, what are some, like, professional networks that you have sort of, like, found really valuable sort of on this journey, you know, to building a career in renewable energy? Or, you know, maybe if it's not a network, what is, like, you know, a resource or a publication, or I don't know, anything besides LinkedIn, right? That you've sort of utilized to build your career. And can we start with, you know, Alex, let's start with you.
I'd be happy to. They're amazing organizations. I think Green Homes is obviously great. Rise is pretty incredible. I found a lot of connections through SIA, like especially when I was a little bit younger, and being able to go to some conferences as not like a company representative necessarily, but as like a student or someone trying to learn. They were, like, Abby and that team is really open with bringing people in to learn. I also, something that at like Intersolar, now PowerFlex, that really stood out to me, we have an amazing network of women in leadership positions, and then just broadly, like, a lot of women within our company, which I had not experienced before, and think I've found so much strength and guidance, like, in those roles. And it was something that I wanted out of a company, and it was a real reason that I was attracted to the company. And tiny anecdote, but, like, on the day that I interviewed, I came into the office in Midtown, and I opened the door, and there were like 15 women in a conference room, and I was like so intimidated right away, and kind of like hurried through to find the people I was like interviewing with, and I found out it was like a women's luncheon that they hosted every month, and it's a really like young leaning company, especially 6 years ago now. And they were talking about maternity leave and or parental leave, and I don't know if there were any people in the company who were thinking about having children or at that stage of their lives, but it was something the company cared about, and it was like really inspiring to me and kind of eye-opening to see people like advocate for peers and for themselves, even if it wasn't immediately relevant to their lives. So kind of off topic, but really blew me away.
No, I mean, we definitely want to, I think, get to that, like, what sort of, you know, what is that aspect of like what you look for in a job that, you know, appeals to you, especially as a woman, or, you know, as just as, you know, diversity in general, but we're going to get to that in a second. But like what are some resources, Animal, that you've sort of utilized it on your career path?
Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit more. So I would say, similar to Alex, I also utilized Rise and SIA as two very helpful networks, just to really grow my personal network and understand more about opportunities. I was actually a Rise New York City chapter lead for 2 years, and we were involved in hosting happy hours for people interested in speaking to professionals in offshore wind and in solar and any other renewable energy industries. They also host like volunteer events sometimes, like park cleanups, other things like that. So it's a really nice space to also just meet other professional women. I think sometimes in the industries that we're interested in, sometimes we're lucky to work in a company that has a very nice split, and sometimes it's a little bit more male dominated. So just, having the opportunity to have meetups with other professional women working in the industry is really nice. And then, as Alex also mentioned, SIA is a great resource. I would also mention Solar Powered World Magazine and some of these other publications that, have newsletters that they send out on their email lists, post on LinkedIn very often just about news in the industry. It's also helpful to follow them and just, be a little bit more aware of some of the recent events that are going on in whatever technology you're interested in. So I would say those two specifically. And then just as a side note, if you are an alum of a specific college or university, I would also really recommend utilizing any of their alumni groups. The NYU alumni group is particularly helpful. I know, of course, it's different from university to university, but there might be people that have studied a similar degree as you that have gone on to do different things, and you might be able to benefit from whatever, advice or opinions they have when they were transitioning to a different industry.
And Natalie, I know you've been at EDF, I guess, in many different capacities for a long time, but I think, have you, utilized any sort of like network or resources, even, on your journey within your company.
Well, so yeah, I'm a little bit of a counterexample because I'm really, really bad at networking. Notoriously bad at networking. I'm good at, and I mean, I guess it can be useful because some people are, a little bit shyer and not good at that either. So I'm not necessarily shy, as you can tell, but I network better internally. So it's been very helpful for me within the EDFR group, also with consultants, people that I'm good at networking with people that I've worked with because there's kind of a base. So, and I think it's not, you don't have to be good at networking. Some people are going to be good at it. Some people are going to do like me, better at internal. And it has helped me through my career because if you worked well with someone and they've grown into this subsidiary or this scope, and they might call on you. That's what happened for me for offshore wind. I was called in from Montreal to New York because somebody was like, oh, we need this person for this now. So that can be helpful. I do like as well to think outside of renewable energy. I mean, I have a bunch of friends, and some of them are amazing women or amazing men who are in like leadership positions or other positions. And just talking about work with them, sometimes from other perspectives out of my industry, is very, very helpful. And without being able to necessarily plug you in for a certain role or give you specifics about your industry, they can still tell you about how they've managed the situation at their company or how they work, and you can be inspired by that. Or they can listen to you, give you good advice, third-party advice with a clear eye, and or challenge you. So I like to also think about it, within your friends or family, because they're outside of it, but they can bring very good perspectives as well for your career.
Yeah, definitely. So sort of transitioning to more of a this is like more of a fun question, but Natalie, what do you wish someone had told you when starting out? Like, what do you wish someone had told you when you were first looking for a job?
Oh, first looking for
like
a
baby
job.
Natalie, right, fresh out of business school. What do you wish someone, like, piece of advice someone had given you?
I think two things. One is you can achieve anything you set your mind for. Like, just trust yourself, get it done. And if people pick you, there's a reason. Like, don't lack self-confidence. And the other one, which comes the opposite side of it, more linked to ambition, is know when to be patient and know when to ask for what you want, because it's not necessarily easy to grow into higher positions, or even if it's not higher positions in terms of a hierarchy, getting new scopes and things like that. You have to prove yourself, etc., but sometimes you're also left on the side, and sometimes you just have to say, I deserve this. So that there's really, I feel like, knowing and hearing from someone more experienced that you can be patient at time, and sometimes it's not the right time to move in or take on more or anything like that, and you should chill and learn and wait your time. I think that would have been helpful for me, because sometimes I've been wanting things too fast, but also like sometimes I've been too patient, and I've been waiting for somebody else to make a decision for me or to hand something over to me. So it's a bit of a difficult thing, but I think if I had heard it at the time, that there's a balance and there's a good time for everything, it would have probably helped me not overthink many situations.
I mean, if I overthink things routinely, I think everyone, does that and reads into every little thing.
Yeah.
And well, since you, right, like you probably started out in your career, perhaps maybe not more recently, but like, I feel like sometimes when you're not as far removed from something, you have a different perspective on it. Do you have like any advice that you would give, your, I guess, younger self about your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really resonate with Natalie's advice about just, understanding when to be patient and then when to push for yourself. I think part of me when I was applying for jobs was really just focusing on quantity versus quality, and just being like, let me try to apply to as many as I can, because then that basically proves to me that I'm putting in the effort to get employed. But I think it's important to really pay attention to what you're chasing and do it consciously. And when you know a little bit more about what you want and you see an opportunity in front of you, just kind of trying to remove yourself emotionally from the situation and trying to understand if this is really the best opportunity for you, if there is a pathway forward for you that you can see yourself sustainably being on, and not just like focusing. Because for me, when I got out of college, I was like, I immediately need a job. Like 30 days after graduating, I need to be employed. That was basically my mindset, because I convinced myself if I gave myself too much time, I would just take a gap year and just never get back to it. I would say, give yourself that balance of the time, but then also the urgency, and then also give yourself the balance of, when's the right time to wait and when's the right time to push.
Yeah, that's great advice. So, like, Alex, thinking back to, when you sort of started your career, like, do you have any, like, specific experiences that sort of stand out that, perhaps, like, had a big impact on your, like, professional growth? Like, can you talk about, like, if you had any sort of, I guess, like, if anything stands out in your head sort of along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that I kind of like wish I'd been told or learned along the way, that like comfort doesn't necessarily mean growth, and being comfortable in a role and maybe seeing like my parents' generation like being in the same role for 30 plus years, and like that was kind of a career. I just kind of expected that to be more of the norm, and I felt so stressed out early in my like years working because I didn't think that it was like a lifetime path for me, and it really, honestly, like it stressed me out thinking that I should be happier and feel more fulfilled in the role that I was in. And I'm really grateful that I trusted my gut and like didn't just stick it out and stay in the same position, and find something. I wanted to find something that felt more true to like what I cared about and my values. An early career experience that really defined, actually, when I left my first company after just about 2 years, which is maybe today like a little bit more normal, but even like then it felt like really quick. I was the first person in my class to leave. An older person in the company like warned me of being a job jumper, and
Yeah.
I was like, I don't feel valued. I don't think this is the career for me, and I don't think my skills are developing in the way that I want them to. Why am I being made to feel guilty about
Yeah.
this? And it really stuck with me. Also, it was a LinkedIn message that I still have from this person.
You saved
And they
it.
subsequently asked, we're looking for an internship for their son. And I was like, okay.
Oh my goodness.
But, all right. But it was maybe a different like age group, generation, experience in their career or whatever. And that to them felt like a great piece of advice, but it felt very like damning for me. And so when, like, if we've been interviewing or if I'm like talking with people, I try to have that perspective of like different career paths, different points in your life where things are the right fit or the wrong fit, and every journey has to be a little bit different, and it doesn't define how successful somebody will be in that role.
Yeah, totally. So now that you guys have been in the industry for, a while, like, I guess you're now probably all hiring managers, which is, so like interesting to be on the other side of things. But, when you, like, as a hiring manager, like, what do you, like, from that experience, what are, like, some things that you want to tell, like, people coming in to interview with you? Like, sort of, what would you say to someone who's, like, starting to apply to jobs and interview in the renewables industry? Like, Anmol, do you have any sort of, like, perspective on that, like being on both sides of the table, I guess?
Yeah, I would say if you can get access to resources that sort of introduce you a little bit more to the process of whatever technology you're interested in. So let's say, it's solar specifically. If you can find certain resources that, maybe give you a little bit more context into how solar projects are originated and how solar projects are developed and then how they're executed and then how they're maintained, right? Just getting a very basic introductory sort of exposure to it. That way you can kind of just inform your conversation during the interview a little bit more, right? Instead of giving generic answers like, I'm interested in solar energy, you can say, I'm really interested in the development aspect of solar energy. I find the permitting process to be very interesting. I find, the engineering process and the facilitation with all of the engineers to be particularly interesting. So being able to just throw in a few casual but specific actionable things that a hiring manager could say, okay, well, this person said they're interested in this specific step of the process. I think a lot of people that are hiring generally have a very zoomed out understanding of what steps of the process need more help, so that could potentially help you pinpoint where you could be useful. And even if it's not something you want to do forever, it's still something that can get your foot in the door, right? So if you know that certain companies have more open positions for a specific aspect of the implementation process, then you can maybe strategize and talk about how you're really passionate about that, right? So I think there's just more opportunity for you the more context you allow yourself to have.
Yeah, I can definitely totally follow that and agree. There's a balance though, because I've had interviews with people who I think I'm not expecting someone who I interview to know everything about offshore wind, obviously. Right. When I started 5 years ago, I had no idea what that was. And so you just learn on the job. There's a level, of course, like if you come in and it's very generic, that's going to be a little bit disappointed. But I've also had interviews with people who basically were pretending they knew more than they knew, and that's also not a good impression. So there's a level, I think, to find. The other thing that I have in mind is don't be afraid sometimes to take a role, particularly when you start, that is a little bit under your what you think your level is, because sometimes it's a way to put the foot in the door. And like as an example, I did that when I moved from France to Canada. I was a senior developer. I had developed big solar, big onshore wind projects, and when I moved to Canada, I was basically told, okay, you're going to be an admin for my development team. And I was like, okay. I mean, I wasn't happy about it, but I said, okay, I'm here now, and I need to. And then in 6 months, they realized, what I could do, and I was just like, oh, I'm going to do this more, and I'm going to do this more, and this more. And I ended up, back to my level of seniority that I had, and then I kept growing more than I would probably have in France, if I had stayed in France. So it's not dooming if you have the right environment as well, companies that give a chance, right? There's also companies, like we were saying earlier, know when to stand up for yourself. There's companies that are not going to let you grow. So I think having this ability to sometimes, lower a little bit your expectations, put your foot in the door and then grow, it's sometimes a good way to enter a company or enter an industry.
Yeah, I really agree with what both of you said. I think the only thing I would add is you're also interviewing a company when a company is interviewing you, and having that more bi-directional experience. Interviews are so stressful for everybody involved, not just for the interviewee but also for the interviewer. And I sweat every single time I interview somebody. But I think understanding what you value in a company, or trying to answer or ask questions that might help you understand what you value in a company, and then framing the conversation in that way is super critical, because you might be walking into something that is actually a different culture fit than what you're looking for, or the role is different than maybe the JD wasn't exactly what the role is going to look like, and asking the right questions to really understand the day-to-day I think is super important. And doing research on the people that you're interviewing with, I think, is also a really great way to relate, and bringing up same university or same program that you studied, or I don't know, you both like rock climbing or something. It's a great way to relate and soften up the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely bringing it down to that human element. But I think, let's go back to what you were talking about, with you're also interviewing the company, as, women in, honestly, we looked up a statistic when we were putting together, I don't know, all of this whole event, and there's a statistic that said only 32% of the people in the renewable energy industry are women, and or identify as women. And sort of in that same vein of interviewing a company, what do you look for in a company or organization, specifically for yourself as a woman, as a female employee, and what are when you like were doing a job search, let's say, like what are some of those things that you try to pinpoint to like find that good culture fit for, you know, maybe not yourself as a woman in particular, but also just like as a human being.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was originally interviewing, looking for a company with a lot of women, like wasn't at the top of my list. It wasn't really something that I thought about. I didn't know a ton about the energy space, and I was just hopeful to find a company that would value me and like allow me to grow. And it really wasn't until joining PowerFlex that I saw and experienced the value of having like a strong like group of like people who identify as women and like women in leadership positions. I think for me, culture fit was like such a critical piece of, it's like such a silly adage, but like the work hard, play hard mentality of like people who really enjoy what they're doing and have a common thread of like the same value of like what you're working towards, and having that that value be able to drive the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis was something that I was looking for. And it's hard to get that feeling from an interview. I think it is not an easy thing to gauge just from like a few 30-minute sessions, but when you ask about culture and what people value in a company and how they spend their time and like what, you know, you can kind of get at some of the answers there.
Yeah. Natalie, what do you like, you know, I guess you maybe have a different experience because I think working, you know, for the same company you've worked for like, you know, it's a really large company, like you've worked for so many different divisions. Like what are some of those things that, you know, you can sort of pinpoint when you like, you know, work with partnerships with another company that, you know, that you sort of, that make you go, oh, that they have a good, healthy culture.
Well, I was thinking about it when I was listening to you in more in the mode of what I actually offer as questions to the people that I interview. Because sometimes I try to push them to understand if they like the culture of Atlantic Shores. And so I ask questions like, you know, what type of management do you like? What, you know, where do you see yourself? Where do you want to grow? And so that's the kind of questions that I would ask now. Like I would need to understand where I can, you know, how I can grow in a company. I would need to make sure that this company and all the bosses that I've worked for in 15 years now, I've been like this. It's not about the amount of hours that you put in. It's not about whether you clock in, clock out. It's about the results. And so that gives you a level of flexibility. So for me, seeking flexibility, and for women in particular, it's particularly important, and particularly if you have a family, you need that flexibility. And knowing that a company, you know, will value you based on the results and not necessarily the hours. I hate the idea of, okay, you have to, it's a very French thing I'm looking at, Lucy, but stay at the office until 8 p.m. and you've demonstrated your value. No. Leave at 4 because everything's been done. That's
good time
demonstrated
management
value.
skills.
So yeah, I think that kind of value is something I would look for. And in terms of the type of manager, for example, I would try to understand if somebody's going to be a micromanager. If they are, I'm going to say, like, I don't want to work with you, obviously. And then obviously other things with regards to, like you mentioned it, women in leadership, diversity, racial diversity, age diversity, all of these things are something that, I mean, we're in a pretty new industry. I'm kind of sad to hear just 32%, to be honest. And I feel like we have a chance to make it not look like old industries.
Like oil and gas, which is...
Like oil and gas, exactly.
You know, famously very... not gender diverse.
Exactly, and so I think that's definitely something that in this industry, I would be very surprised if I were, you know, interview with a company that doesn't have a good diverse team and women in leadership and people of color in leadership, because that's what I expect in this industry. So I would definitely be looking at that as well.
What do you think, Anmol? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think I agree with the point that it's a little bit hard to judge through the interview process. I think you have to use a bit of context clues as well, you know, with that process. For me particularly, I really pay attention to the way that the person engaging with me from that company is interacting with me. Like, is it a warm interaction? Do they follow up? Are they interested? Or are you kind of just, you know, another resume in the pile? Sometimes it's more of a gut feeling, you know, sometimes you can't really tell. So I would just say to, you know, trust your instincts and try to focus on asking the right questions. You know, sometimes it's helpful to understand a little bit more about the work a company is doing and then what the size of that company is relative to the work that they have, you can kind of understand a little bit more about like, do you have a really small team and you're doing a bunch of work? So does that mean everyone's super overworked, or do you have like a nice sized team for the amount of work that you're projecting to do? Again, when you don't know much about the industry or you don't have the work experience, it's harder to quantify that. But again, try to get as many clues as you can from the interview process, and if there is an opportunity to maybe speak with the person you would be directly working with, if it goes further into a second or third round interview, that will likely be your best indicator of what that company culture will be like. Because regardless of what the HR professional is like or what their website might says, obviously your day-to-day will be mostly impacted by whoever your direct manager is and whoever your coworkers are.
And that's why I think you're really entitled to ask the question, what type of manager are you?
Right.
Because
Absolutely.
you're going to be working with this person, and it's a good fit on both sides, right? If the person answers, I'm really going to be working with you every day, and you need more freedom, that you're not going to satisfy that person, then you're not going to be satisfied. And on the opposite side, if you are someone who needs a lot of structure, needs a lot of being held by the hand a little bit, at least for 6 months, and if the manager is very much, I don't have time, I won't be able to help you, you're not a good fit with them either. So it's like dating. You just have to find the right
Try
it.
it out.
I had one more thing.
Yeah, of course.
If you're interviewing with a privately held company, to not be nervous about asking about their plans for the future, especially if it's a smaller group who's like gone through investment rounds or whatever. I feel like it's an uncomfortable question to ask about where a manager sees the future of the company moving, but in such a dynamic space, I think it's really important.
Yeah, for sure. Like, what are, sort of on that note, like, what are some sort of like, red flags that you've seen with like, even just not even like, obviously not at the company that you're currently working at, but like in the past or sort of in the space, like, have you ever like experienced like instances where, the people or the organizations that you're seeing sort of talk the talk but like didn't walk the walk, and like how did you like kind of like sniff that out? Like,
That's a harder one.
Yeah.
take your time.
In interviews specifically, or
No, just in general. I mean, like, I feel like a lot of the time, like, when you sort of make observations about companies, like, even though an interview situation is very short and kind of fraught, like, you can kind of, I feel like if you're good at, have that sense, you can kind of also, if you have, like, a couple of rounds of interviews, you sort of started getting the gist of things. Like, is there anything that, like, stands out to you, like, in particular, like, where you're like, oh, they're like, clearly there's something off there, like.
Yeah. One thing that comes up for me, we'll see if you have the same one, but lack of clarity. Like, if you're in an interview and someone is not able to really describe their role, it's like these videos you see of consultants on Instagram, like, what are they exactly saying?
Right.
So if you are in an interview and that person, defines the job of the scope of their department or their own job, or they have like very fun title names, like, I'm gonna be like, okay, what's wrong with this company? I'm probably gonna be like, okay, roles and responsibilities are probably not very well defined. There might be empty roles, like people who have titles but have empty roles and probably don't, do a lot. And I really like doers. I really like people who actually do their job and not just are there in meetings. So I would, this kind of thing, like lack of clarity and empty words would be a red flag for me in an interview or a consultant that I would work with, or
Yeah. I would also, just to add to that, if you go into an interview and the job description does not match what they're describing as the role that you're interviewing for, I would say that's a pretty big red flag. Even if you're interested in the company, when something like that happens, it's usually an indicator that they either don't have a good idea of what exactly that they're hiring for, or that they're just very disorganized. So personally, I've gone to 1 or 2 interviews where, they're have a very specific job description, and then you kind of ask them to elaborate on it, and then they're just telling you something completely different. So when you're in a situation like that, like, I think it's important to be upfront and be like, okay, this is very different from the job description that you posted and from the expectations I had, so can you help me understand is this still part of the job, or where is the expectation on their end? So like we said, I think the interview process really tells you a lot about a company. So if that does happen to you, that would be kind of a red flag to maybe start looking elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I think time, being on time to a meeting, to an interview is also like such a red flag. If someone's running late and isn't able to like shoot you a quick email to say like running 2 minutes behind, I'll be there in a minute. I'd want to make sure that that person, even if I'm just interviewing, like cares about my time as much as I value theirs, and I think that shows character.
Yeah, definitely. So before we start, moving on to some of the questions that you guys all submitted, I want to ask one question. So are any of you like involved in any organizations or, any effort, sort of as managers or in your own company to like increase the diversity in the renewable industry in general? Anmol, I do know some things that you do, so how about you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. So outside of my full-time work at Brightcore, I also have an organization called Solar Powered Success. And the point of the organization is really to empower the next generation of the green workforce. So we do some coaching, we do some work also with some public schools. So in New York City right now, we're working with the Brooklyn Steam Center on a pilot program that really introduces different aspects of solar business implementation to the students there. Majority of the students there are, either Black or Hispanic or some form of minority, and I'll say about 30% of our program is women out of whoever's participating in the program. So that's really exciting. We're hoping to expand it to other schools in the New York City area and just build a network for professionals to connect with schools and students that are interested in renewable energy and just learn a little bit more about what that process looks like.
Yeah. So part of my scope at Atlantic Shores is I manage staffing. So I have very high expectations, and we're defining goals for diversity within at least the pool of interviewees. And one of the things that we're doing is a lot of partnerships with universities, and we've set up, it's the second year actually that we have interns also start working in our different departments, and what we've done is for these interns we've really tried to find them in the communities that our projects would impact, so where our export cables would end up, or the areas that we have a view, for example, on the offshore wind turbines. So there's really not just my department. There's also different departments that are working on supplier diversity, strategic partnerships with universities. We have Stockton, we have Rutgers in particular, which we fund programs for STEM schools. So I think there's a bunch of things that we can do now, which is more like when we interview to try to have a wide pool to publish our job descriptions and publish the roles on platforms that are going to allow us to have a diverse pool of candidates. But there's also things, and that's back to what I was saying, as we were building kind of new industries that are more recent, I want to make sure that we're making efforts now to invest in the future workforce. And so I think, that's why we invest so much in universities and in STEM programs. So obviously it's not all my team, but at least Atlantic Shores is very focused on that.
That's great that you are trying to foster that as someone who sort of has some power to influence how your company runs in staffing. Alex, are you involved in anything at PowerFlex or just outside, that just sort of increase diversity within the renewables space?
Yeah, I think within PowerFlex in particular, similar to Natalie, the biggest way I can influence is in the hiring process,
yeah.
And where we're interviewing, where we're getting candidates from, and trying to expand that pool. We've been really fortunate in the past to use the NYSERDA program as a great way to find candidates, and that's diverse backgrounds and local to the New York area, which is great to get that in-office experience, and FaceTime, which is obviously the best way to learn, I think, is being in the office. And we've been really successful over the last 3-4 years to get interns who then turned into full-time hires on our team and came from that program. I think PowerFlex overall does a better job than I do myself about promoting DEI and having like an internal resource and like support group for people.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of looking forward to over the next year. It's a big initiative of ours as a company to expanding that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's always, good to improve, especially like, DEI did sort of exist before COVID, but now it's sort of an expanding field, and I think a lot of companies are kind of figuring out what that means. Okay.
Abby, I have one other thing to add quickly, if you don't mind. One other thing just at Brightcore is sometimes, depending on the clients we work with, especially certain universities, they do have a requirement to work with a certain percentage of MWBE certified contractors. So that's also a great resource. Like a lot of times if companies are certified, they do advertise it in some way. So you can do a little bit more research about MWBE certified companies and, maybe see if that would be a good fit for you, because that's also kind of a green flag, if you will, that there's likely some diversity either, with gender or with ethnicity or religion. Yeah.
But I would say that though that because I think you had a question about or you had a question earlier about what the talk and the walk.
Yeah.
It's a very American expression, and I don't have it.
It's okay. I know.
Walk the talk.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can talk about it later.
Yeah. Whatever.
But I do think another resource is when you research companies that you're going to interview to see if they actually walk the talk. Look at their executive committee. Like just look at that, because like even though I think Atlantic Shores and EDFR are making great efforts on DEI, I still think that their leadership is too white and too male. I have nothing against white males, but I would like this to be more diverse. And so I think it's a progress. It's a work. It's never going to be over.
Right,
There's still going to be work to do, and the intent is there, and there's more and more action, not just talk. But I think it's important to. That's a good way to check, I would say.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of pervasive around, sort of STEM and engineering and tech, that it's very male-dominated, very white, no matter what company you go to. So it's good, as sort of as the renewable space, like, sort of grows up to try to push for that.
Yeah.
So we're going to start doing some questions that were pre-submitted by the audience, so you guys submitted them. And then we're going to take 20 minutes to do Q&A. Does that sound good? Okay. So, on that same vein, like, what do you think can be done, sort of thinking ahead into the future to get more women involved in renewable energy and, expand opportunities to women, but also everybody from like diverse social and economic backgrounds, and like, also in historically disadvantaged communities. Like, what do you think that like the industry like could be doing, to push for that?
I think we need to inform better that this is an industry that has a lot of labor need, like needs a lot of people. So I think engagement with these universities, these schools, these communities is important. Informing them that this exists, investing in that future workforce, as we were saying, and then on a day-to-day, I mean, we're probably doing that now. There's the like support women kind of thing, like women supporting women kind of thing, and. I'm not saying you should favor, if you have, I don't know, 2 juniors you've been working with for a little while, that you should favor necessarily the women, but you could, as a woman, think, it's very likely that she will not think of herself for the next role, because we tend to, oversell ourselves. So I think there's when you climb a step, like remember that you were there before, and then help the next one.
Absolutely.
And it's easy to forget, I think, because you're just so focused on your own career. So just try to remember it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I 100% agree with that. I think it's also just a matter of like more representation. Like I know for myself as a Pakistani American woman, just like going to events and being there for people to talk to in itself is helpful. So I try to make myself as available as possible. I am a bit of a homebody, I will admit. COVID has made it worse. But I try my best to get out there. I'm also like notoriously terrible at networking. So I think
network together.
yes, we can work on it together. So I think really just for myself, just going out there more and being more visible, I think is really helpful. Even just aside from the experience situation, and then just empowering and publicizing more women and more minorities that are in the industry. Like recently, like I think this engineer at NASA, his headshot went viral, right? He was just like black at NASA, and then there was a bunch of different African Americans at NASA that started posting their headshots, and there was like so much visibility on just like the minority workforce within their company. And I think like the more we can use social media or use this public network we have available to us to just get the word out there, the more impactful it can be.
Yeah, it's been a while, but I agree with what you were saying, Allie, about education and awareness. Like going to any of the universities that we have around New York City and career fairs, people don't know that these jobs are available. This isn't necessarily like, even though renewables it's grown like so significantly over the past like 10 years, let's say, but I think people just don't have a general sense and awareness that it's not just a singular career, like a construction career or a business development career. Like there are a lot of opportunities available for people. And also as hiring managers, depending on what you're doing, obviously if you're more technical, this doesn't necessarily apply, but diversity and background, I think if you're looking at two different candidates, maybe one has more experience in that field and might be able to immediately like hit the ground running in a way that the other candidate wouldn't, but diversity and background and experience can be so valuable, and bringing that to a team that is currently doing maybe like one or two different things, being open to like having a new hire, bringing on a new person with a different background can be more valuable than you've previously imagined.
Yeah, totally. And in that similar vein, because we all are like networking, is the worst. What do you see as like critical ways to sort of democratize the networking process to, maybe ensure that people from underrepresented groups can, access career opportunities? I guess because not everybody has access to career fairs at NYU, or I don't know, like are maybe transitioning from another career. Like what do you think are some ways to get sort of a more diverse pool of candidates?
I think you have to go there specifically. I think you just have to identify these areas where you want to. Because if you centralize the job fairs, as you say, like it's going to be huge events. It's not going to be very easy for people who are not good at networking or just starting in their careers. So I think like smaller groups in specific areas is probably the way to go, which I will take a note of actually.
I mean,
yeah, I agree with that. I think developing a robust mentoring network and really just finding ways to connect professionals with these sort of underserved communities and giving them a structure that gives them enough context and enough order, but enough flexibility also for them to kind of just take it however they feel would be best for who they're speaking to. So I think that, organizations like Green Home and like Rise and others are already trying to sort of bridge the gap between who wants the information and who has the information.
Yeah.
So it's really just like supporting those organizations more and, being present for those efforts in case someone would find your specific experience valuable to them.
Yeah.
And like specific to, women, like what do you think, like can you think of like a specific example that you've seen, sort of how, there has been a good promotion of diversity and inclusion, especially particularly to women in the renewable sector, that, has encouraged women's like participation in that sector and also participation perhaps in like leadership? Like, can you think of an example, like, just I think you were talking about, having a company like talk about like maternity leave like really early on before anyone else was thinking about it. Like, is there something else like that stands out to you just in companies you've seen or at your own company?
Yeah, I think it has to be top down for something to be effective, and so it needs to start with the CEO who's willing to communicate a message that like parental leave matters, that we need to be talking about issues with a full company, and that it's women's issues are not just women's issues, it's a full company issue. And I think having that start with like CEO down is absolutely critical, and not something that every company is like capable of doing. But it takes time, and so especially like the energy industry, the renewables industry, it's a lot of small companies, and you're doing a lot. Everybody wears a lot of different hats, and it can be difficult to carve out that time. But for leadership teams to sit down and prioritize women's issues and prioritize talking through how we can improve, I really do believe that's a top-down approach.
I guess I have more of a personal example, but when the joint venture was set up, the executive team was smaller than it is now, and it was 50-50 men, women. And for me, that was inspiring. Like, I was just like, okay, I'm going to change my life, move to New York, and that's something that I want to, that's a company that I want to work with when I see that, because you can picture yourself growing in an executive role, but also because you know that they will, that diversity will flow down in the company in the ways of working, for example, and it will inspire more people to come in and more quality people to join. And then at a personal level, I had worked, I think, more with executives that were men in the past, and I learned different ways of being a good executive. When I started working with these women executives, I was like, oh, they have different like they are strong, but without the like punch you in the face kind of energy, and they care about people. And so I don't know if that's a women trait, but it's something that was really inspiring, and I think can be inspiring to other women starting in the same company.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I feel like individually, companies that we've worked for probably provide the best context of experience when it comes to something like that. Like, I remember when I first started working at Enter Solar, Lucy was the person that interviewed me, actually, to work at Enter Solar. So at first I was like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And she's, sort of the leadership, she's a person assuming the leadership role in the engineering team. So for me, that meant a lot that, like, there would be a woman in a leadership position. But I remember specifically one time I had a dentist appointment, and I sent her a message on Slack. I was like, Lucy, like, I have a dentist appointment. She was like, you don't have to tell me every time you have an appointment. Just block off your calendar, and that way no one will schedule any meetings. And that was like a mind-blowing moment for me, because the job I was at previously, I was used to, like, if you're not in your desk at the exact moment you're supposed to be at your desk, 1 minute later you'll get an email like, why aren't you at your desk? So I think that was like very telling that just like people have very different management styles, and more often than not, in my experience, when you are working for a woman, there is a little bit more context, a little bit more understanding, and a little less micromanaging. So I would just look for specific examples within companies you're working for, and seeing if there are other examples of women in leadership and women you can look up to and potentially like work towards their level of leadership.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So we're going to start taking some questions from the audience. So please raise your hand if you have a question, and try to speak loud enough so that we can all hear. You in? Yeah.
So as you guys have transitioned to different roles as different companies throughout your careers, what is like the guiding thoughts that you have when like faced with so many different opportunities in this like now burgeoning, industry, right? There's, I'm sure, plenty of recruiter emails in all of your guys' inboxes, with one job that's offering you a ton more money, or there's one job that you can really, or at your current role that where you can kind of focus more and become like more of a specialized, in more of a niche, or there's one that where you can learn like a lot more, and gain a new skill set or something. How do you guys think about either in the past or now, what new opportunities you want to pursue when it's the right time?
I feel like I have a cycle of 5 years. After 5 years, I get bored, so that's been easy so far. No, but I think there's a moment. You were saying this earlier. There's, if you're not challenged, comfort is not necessarily good. So I think you feel it when it's the time for you to look elsewhere, and sometimes actually opportunities present themselves right at that time. It's the star alignment, as I call it. And the part, though, that I like about comfort and the thing that I'm thinking about if I have an opportunity is I want to, I'm very cautious. So I want to, I would say like 60% of the scope is something that I have to be comfortable with, and then 40% might be dangerous. And might be something I have to learn. Like if I don't have a secure base a little bit in the new role, I probably won't go. And also like sometimes, that's for roles that are a little bit challenging, and then there's roles that you think are under your skill set, and then you don't necessarily go for these unless you want to change industry or put your foot in the door, like I was saying earlier. But yeah, I think there's just a moment where you're not learning anything anymore, and when you look at this next role, I would look for a little comfort just because I'm a very cautious person.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a balance to be had between, when should you really just kind of go for it, and when should you take a step back, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. So I do have, plenty of recruiters reaching out to me, but I think it's really just a question of how do you feel in your current role. Like I do feel like if you're unhappy, like you'll find a way to, find a different role or maybe change your position. But you really just have to ask yourself how you feel. I've been at Brightcore for 3 years, and when I was deciding to make the change, I wasn't 100% sure that I wanted to make the change. I really enjoyed everybody I worked with. I enjoyed the projects I worked on. So it was really just a matter of like, is it worth it for me to take this risk to work with a different group of people, maybe people with less expertise, to try to work on these specific type of projects that I want to work on? So that was really the question I was asking myself at that time. But I think ultimately, like Natalie said, you kind of know, like when it's time to, I think, push yourself further, or maybe go to the next step, or go through a different door. So I think just self-reflecting as much as you can, and maybe doing a self-check-in. You know how most companies, you do a professional review with your hiring manager every year. You should kind of do a professional review with yourself and ask yourself, like, am I happy with my performance? Am I happy with the growth that I'm seeing? Am I happy with the way my managers are communicating with me? Do I feel there's a pathway forward or not? And when you kind of just give yourself an avenue to ask yourself those questions by yourself, and not, in the context of a professional review with someone that's hired you or someone that's paying you, it's usually helpful to figure out if you're happy there, or you think you want to make a change.
Yeah, and I'd add I had an old manager who recommended that you always be somewhat revenue tied and growth tied. Obviously, it depends on like what kind of company you're in, and I guess the stage that company is in. But I've always been more on the business development side, and so that really rang true. Like it matters to me to have my actions directly impact like the success of our company, but then to always be like selfish. It's not bad, but to be selfish and like make sure you have a trajectory of growth within that company. And so even within PowerFlex, like in the time that I've been here, we've been Intersolar, we've been PowerFlex, we are now an EDF organization. Like we've grown a lot, and my North Star has always been, is there an opportunity for me to grow as an individual? And can I do that while still maintaining a position as somebody who is helping and like driving the growth of the company? And those, I think that over the years, I've found those are the two areas where I feel satisfaction in my job, because I want to continue to have more tools in the tool belt and like not just leave and be able to do like the one thing that I've done for several years, but also to walk away feeling proud that I've helped build an organization or grow us to a point that past where we were when I originally joined.
Yeah, that's great. Does anyone else have, any other questions that maybe weren't answered? Yeah.
Yeah, so you all talked about how like one of the important ways to welcome in a more diverse workforce is to keep doing a better job of informing and educating different communities and schools at that level. So I was thinking about that. It's sort of like a new kind of marketing, right? And I'm wondering, within your company, who does that fall to? And as people involved in staffing, how do we keep them accountable, make sure they're actually getting and reaching those communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the like in general, HR team needs to be super bought into this, because I am not going to, I have like, I know universities, I know groups like this, and that's really the extent of my knowledge in New York. So I really like heavily rely on our like HR team to be able to do that research. And also the younger people on my team, like people who have graduated more like recently and were on like the job hunt more recently, I've really leaned on their expertise and like things that they wish that they had known 1 year, 2 years previously. I think I've like probably had some of the best guidance, like finding like using the NYSERDA group and whatnot, from those people.
Yeah, for me, it's a mix. It's maybe specific to offshore wind, but our projects are also more valuable to sell to the states if they have local content.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this, states are responsible also for creating this kind of incentive. And so because of that, we do have a whole team that's in charge of local content development, supplier diversity, and strategic partnerships, in New Jersey and New York, which are our two target markets. And so I've asked my staffing manager to work with them directly. I've told her, like, I want our job descriptions to be posted on the platforms that make sense for this team. I want, you to be going to the events that they're going to. So it's kind of a mix. And where I kind of link it to the previous question and your previous answer, it has a business impact. It's not just, we're not doing this, just out of a kindness and because it's the right thing to do. It brings value to not just the diversity of a team, but it brings value to the business. You are more valuable to the state. So I think, it's I would say it's really great to have incentives from your client, but it's also good to like mix it, not just leave it at the HR side of things, because we've talked about leadership, etc., but mixing it with the business, the engineering, like the design of the project is going to make it more real and more deliverable.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Also on the solar side, like Natalie mentioned, with offshore wind, there is some incentive, from the regulation standpoint to pursue opportunities that would benefit low to moderate income households. So community solar specifically in New Jersey, for example, has a requirement for that. So for a lot of our projects, it really is something that's built into our incentive requirements, which is helpful to make sure that maybe other developers or other people involved in executing projects that don't have such a focus on it are still part of that effort. And then second to that, I would say, just company metrics, holding some form of structure for the organizations that they want to reach out to, charitable donations, networking events, and then companies really kind of making an effort to document that and stay on top of their engagement goals throughout the year.
Anyone else have questions that they want answered? Yeah. Can you speak up a little bit?
So for an individual who is looking to pivot their roles into renewable energy sector now, what are some of the transferable skills or experiences that they can that are most valuable, and how they can effectively highlight them during the interview process or in their resumes?
Do you want to start? I can start.
Sure. Yeah, you can start.
One of the most transferable skills to me is showing your sense of like organization. Basically, maybe it's the French background, but the chat, talk. In an interview, it's gonna be too much for me. I need like concise answers, because it's gonna show me that you're a structured person, that you structure your what you want to share with me, and then for some roles I'm going to ask for cases as well that are going to show me that you're structured. So I think one of the most transferable skills is the ability to be organized, to have trackers, and that works in any industry, and it's necessary in any role as well. That's the first one that came to mind. I'm sure as you guys
I have two specific suggestions. So the first one would be if you have any relevant project management experience. If you can write specific bullet points on your resume related to roles about facilitating communication between multiple parties, documenting that progress, meeting project deadlines, that's pretty transferable, and that does speak volumes to somebody's effectiveness. So if you're working in a specific industry and you can say you helped complete X amount of projects on time, or you had a direct involvement in streamlining an execution process of something. So I would say that would be sort of the first part of just project management. And then the second part, I would say client communication, especially if you have like a client-facing role or you're interested in a sales role or something to that nature. I would also highlight those type of bullet points if you have experience being a client-facing person and you have comfortability in public speaking and, closing meetings, things like that. So, I think generally you can probably look at your experience and see where you best communicate and where you're most organized, and then try to leverage that on your resume, and then, talk about it as well during your interview.
Project management was also my answer, because I feel like in any industry it's something that comes up. I've also received resumes. A one-page resume is perfect because it should be concise and you should be able to clearly explain what you've done. But with case studies afterwards, so it was more specific work experience where somebody could show their writing skills and their communication skills through their writing, and maybe explain in a bit more detail the impact that they had. And the specificity, as you were saying, Anmal, is really helpful. Otherwise, we just kind of talk in generalities and what is project management, what is business development. But to be able to write something to really thoroughly explain the work that you did, even if it's not the same industry, the same technology, whatever it is, I think it's a really a simpler way to communicate your experience, and maybe somebody can read the transferable skills kind of between the lines.
Yeah. I think it's really the interviewer's role to do that. So I think defending any deliverable or any work project that you've had in any industry, as long as you're able to articulate it clearly, and sometimes you can by yourself make some connection, it looks a little bit like what you do in renewable energy for that specific scope. Right. It can be helpful. When I interview, I'm particularly, and I've actually had that 2 weeks ago, where my staffing manager had shortlisted 2 candidates, and both candidates, when I drilled down, I started okay, what did you actually do on that project? Because you say you led this, or if you're not able to actually articulate how you led this, what were the real deliverables? If you were just part of a team that did that, maybe you were just if you're not able to articulate it, for me, you might just have been in one meeting out of the whole project. Right. So I think as long as you're able to articulate a deliverable from any industry, it's already a good sign that you're good at PMO, that you are a doer and you deliver things.
Yeah.
Would you have any advice for people navigating a transition mid-career?
Any advice on what, sorry?
Do you have any specific advice about people transitioning mid-career? So if you were in a different sector, tech, for example, you're kind of navigating, I've had the experience where I feel I was tied to a specific type of role, or, but just generally, if you've seen people make that transition successfully in your sector, I'd love to hear your advice.
I can start on that. On our analyst team, in the last 2 years, the head of our analyst team, the hires that he made were people who had totally different careers than being in renewables. I think one came from insurance and the other came from consulting. And obviously, there are translatable skills and you can see a lot of this stuff, but both of those people came in having done NABCEP certification for one of them, and then a financial modeling course through Wall Street Prep, or one of those that was solar renewable energy modeling. I think it was on utility scale and we're CNI, but it was still the effort that was there, and clearly somebody had put time and was very intentional about making that transition. I think effort and the care, it stands out. It's not necessarily, it's going to be the full differentiator, but I think it's really helpful.
Yeah, I've had a lot of that as well over the past 5 years in the joint venture, because we've incorporated a lot of people who did oil and gas, for example, from Shell. And I have a little bias. I'm from EDFR, so I like people even more, also because they're more green. But one of the things that I think is really important when you come in mid-career is, it's kind of a loop back to my first answer to the first question, curiosity. Because you come with a lot of experience. I think highlighting that your skill sets are transferable, highlighting what you've done, like we just discussed, is important. But do not assume that it's a copy-paste. And if you keep showing, if you show curiosity and you're like, okay, so I know I've been a project manager, I think, it seems to fit with what you do, but like, what are specifics of renewables, for example? And one of the questions that I ask in interview very often, and is a very good green light, red light, is, so what are you comfortable with about the role, and what are you uncomfortable with? Somebody tells me they're not uncomfortable, and I'm like, let's drill down. Because you have to be a little bit uncomfortable, particularly when you're mid-career. And yeah, I think you have to defend your background and be able to say everything that you think fits this new role, but also understand that there's a ramp up that you're going to have to learn. And if you showcase that, I think it's very vulnerable, it's very honest, and it works.
Yeah, I just have 2 other points to add. So I recently interviewed someone that was trying to transition into the renewable energy industry, and I asked them, like, what is it specifically about renewables that you're interested in? And he literally said, I don't know. He was just like, I don't know, I'm kind of just, looking for a change. And that was just like, okay, I don't really know where you think this interview is going to go from here. So, just being really articulate about what specifically is driving you and having a good answer for why do you, want to make this pivot, because that question will inevitably come up. So, I would say that's my first sort of piece of advice. And the second one would just be to, be confident in your ability to perform in that role. We have one project engineer on our team who worked in oil and gas for 6 years, and he had no solar experience at all. And I kind of told him, like, you're kind of come in and we're going to throw you into the fire a bit here because we don't have that many engineers. We have things to get done. Like, are you willing to kind of just pick up the pieces where you need to and learn along the way? And he was like, I'm absolutely willing. Like, I really want to be part of this industry. So it was really his passion to get in there that sold me, because there was no other real reason for me to say, like, okay, fine, let me just make my life more difficult for 3 months while I train you. But I think passion goes a really long way.
Do you think more in our industry than others? Because I've been wondering about that.
I do.
Yeah.
I definitely do. Yeah. I think when people feel that their day-to-day actions are having a real impact on their environment and, the global environment that we all have to live in, I think it kind of adds a different level of investment personally into doing your job well.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question? Yes.
Are there any resources that you can think of to better educate oneself on the renewable industry as someone who's just recently graduated, may not have as much education?
And as a follow-up to this, can you spell any acronyms?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh my God, we've used a lot.
Yeah.
People taking notes.
Sorry.
And
Yeah.
acronyms.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Don't
You should have,
hesitate
like,
to
a
come back
glossary.
to us after for that. I'm thinking really, it's renewable energy globally, but I think reading the like federal websites, like the Department of Energy, the reports that they publish, specifically in offshore wind, that's what I did when I started, the Bureau of Energy Management, the BOEM, what their permitting process is. I think this is super helpful. So I do think like agencies that manage permitting specifically, or the states, like if you look at New Jersey's Master Energy Plan, you'll understand a lot of things like what transmission issues are, what storage issues are, things like that. I think these can be very, very, very helpful.
Yeah, I agree. So, just to give a little more information on one acronym we've been saying several times tonight. So NYSERDA, which is the New York, damn it, I always forget this.
New
It's
York
something
State
Energy Research and Development
Energy Research
Authority.
and
I don't know what the
Development
S is.
It's
think it's
state.
New York State.
New York State.
We got it. New York State Energy and Research
Development
Authority. All right, with something like that. So NYSERDA, they have a lot of free resources. They also have like a very extensive list of companies that are like certified NYSERDA contractors and developers and things like that. So you can look into there just to do more research on companies. And then I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug here since I have the opportunity. Solar Powered Success also offers a Solar Fundamentals online course, so it's a virtual course you can sign up for, and it just gives you a very high-level introduction to different parts of the solar industry. And that was something that was specifically requested by a lot of recent college graduates that reached out to me for mentorship that just want something introductory but enough detail without having to go a bunch of different places. So you can also check that out.
And this is like I don't know if you might do this for your university or something like that, but Google Alerts for like specific keywords. I have done that for my company, for the overall like renewables industry, and I have everything that goes into a single folder in my Gmail. And it's a great way to just do a quick check to see like where those keywords popped up. And I think there's like so many paywalls and that can be like difficult sometimes to like Norton Rose Fulbright is really great, Wood Mackenzie is really great, and those are like really great like research. I'm trying to remember the name of the woman who writes for Wood Mackenzie. She spoke at Intersolar one day. Okay, I will think about this afterwards, but really like fantastic research pieces that I think are digestible as well. But the Google Alerts are a great way to get that like day to day in your inbox. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. You guys were amazing, and I'm like I've learned so much just sitting and talking to you. And thank you all for coming to this event. If you are interested in staying for some networking, I think we're gonna try to do some of that. We also, if you're interested in volunteering for Green Home NYC, you can talk to any of the volunteers that are floating around. Like if someone looks like they sort of know what's going on, please talk to us. We're happy. We will please join us. So let's get this going, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.